have to stop and change tape in about 20 minutes.
Okay.
We ready to start?
But you don't want to back up and have to start over then, right?
I mean, if you,
Okay.
you know, uncomfortable with an answer or something. We can
That way I
start
won't take any chances and all this stuff.
Oh, we can make it as, you know. We like raunchy stories. We appreciate those.
Oh, I don't have any of those.
You don't?
No, not on camera. You want that, you got to go back in the car.
I see. Okay.
Right, Knox?
That's right. Clean.
Okay, tape is rolling.
Or tour Graceland, maybe. That's a good place to tell some raunchy stories.
Yes, Steve.
Steve, who were some of your first musical influences?
Oh, I don't know. Let's see, how far do I need to go back for that one? First influences, I think, when I was a kid listening to the Grand Ole Opry, I got influenced by, I think, the upness of music and, you know, the happiness and all that sort of thing. In terms of where it led me later, I think when I first came to Memphis, I was just young, 9 years old. I had my first real chance of listening to black gospel on the radio, because there was a lot of that here, you know, on WDIA, and I really enjoyed that music. I don't know what it was at such a young age that impressed me, but the black spiritual music just, it gave me a whole different attitude, you know, about music. And when I got into it later, I really liked the way the guitar player sort of played. There was a lot of groups that would go out with just a guitar player. There's sort of like a cappella group, and then there would be this guitar player playing this great stuff, you know. And I really enjoyed that. Later, I guess, you know, like any other kid of that time, guitar players, I guess from Dwayne Eddy to Chet Atkins to, you know, from Tal Farlow to, you know, all of the great guitar players. Chuck Berry, of course, with his rock and roll stuff and everything. I don't know if I was really as much intrigued by guitar as I was by groups and styles and, you know, Little Richard and the Platters and people like that. You know. Hank Ballard and the Midnighters, well.
What made you decide to become a guitar player? When did you pick up your first one?
My first one, I remember doing it. I don't really remember what year it was. I guess I was somewhere around 14 years old, and either from watching TV or just the like for it, I said, I want to play guitar. And believe it or not, I set bowling pins down here at Park Lane's bowling alley one summer. I think it was 10 cents a game or something like that, and saved up about $20, and I ordered my first guitar from Susan Roebuck catalog. They brought it out on a truck. That was my first one. Didn't even know how to string it or anything. It just come out of the box, and they said, here it is, and I went, wait a minute, isn't it supposed to be tuned and all that stuff? So that was my first experience with a guitar.
Did you have any formal lessons, or did you pick it up?
No, I really didn't have a musical background in the family. My aunts and my father and all, they had a like for music. You know, they sang and stuff like that, and some of my aunts played a little piano. And my uncle played a little fiddle and a little guitar, and I'd, you know, come in from the fields every now and then. I'd go to the closet and sneak out his guitar and bang on it a little bit. And I think maybe that's what got me interested. I liked the sound of it. I liked the ring of the notes. It was always kind of intriguing.
Now, when we were in the car on the way over here, you talked a little bit about, I guess it was your first recording session, and that happened with Sam Phillips at Sunrise.
Well, it wasn't my first session. It was my first song.
Ah.
And a real funny story about that. I got into writing songs, and I used to write stuff down on paper and all that. And I wrote this instrumental, and it was real funny. I wrote it about the bass player that everybody knows about, Duck Dunn, you know, now the world famous Duck Dunn. And he and I were buddies, and we hung out a lot. You know, we grew up from grade school. And I wrote this instrumental, and I actually titled it Ducky. And it was kind of a cute, bouncy little tune, you know. And I didn't read music or write music, and I wanted to, I think the word copyright meant something to me. And I said, I got to get this copyright, I got to get this down, and that meant get a lead sheet on it. Well, I didn't know how to do it. And so I just kind of asked around class, you know, anybody who read music or wrote music, and I found a guy named B.B. Cunningham, Jr., and it turned out that his father happened to be B.B. Cunningham, Sr., who kind of worked for Sam Phillips. But anyway, we went to his house after school, and then so I played him my song on the guitar, and he picked it out on the piano, and he wrote this little lead sheet for me. And his father walked in the door, came in from work, and he said, hey, what's that? And so B.B. said, oh, this is a little song that Cropper wrote, and he's got me writing this thing. He said, oh, wow. He said, that's kind of cute. He said, I don't know if he said cute or good or whatever he said. He said, Bill Justice is in the studio cutting. He said, you know, they're kind of looking for songs. He said, why don't you let me take it down to him. So he went to the bedroom or wherever and come out with this little tape recorder, and we made a little tape of it. And I don't know, about a week or so later at school, BB came up and says, "Oh, by the way," he said, "I think Bill's going to do your song." And I was just naturally, you know, hit the floor, passed out, whatever I did, I don't remember. But that was really exciting. I was 15 years old at the time. So that was a big deal for me, you know, that somebody was going to record one of my songs. And it happened, I think, at a good time, because Bill had just had a #1 record with Raunchy, and then I think his second one was called College Man, which went #1, and I wound up on the flip side of a song called Cloud 9, and which did quite well. So I was real happy, and I think by the time I was, well, a little bit after, I guess I was 16, I got my first royalty check from that song. So I was in big awe of the record business. I said, this is what I want to do. You can actually have fun and make money at the same time.
Do you consider yourself more of a songwriter or a guitar player?
Oh, I don't know. That's hard to say. You know, people have been trying to convince me for years I'm a guitar player, and of course I know better, you know. I think the songwriting came first, and I think the guitar came second, and being in Memphis in an environment around such a marriage of black ethnic music, blues, and country farm kind of music, and church music, gospel and all that, being influenced by all of that kind of music, I either evolved out of or lucked up on a certain style that seemed to be popular among people who were making records. And people like Stan Kessler, people like Scotty Moore, people like Chips Moman, you know, they liked the way I played guitar. They liked this kind of half country, half funky blues kind of style of guitar playing. And it just later developed into wherever it went. But to answer your question, I think songwriting actually came first.
How do you write a song? Where does it come from? What's your inspiration?
Well, that's sort of what you wait for. I mean, I don't, unlike I guess some people I know, sort of walk around with a handful of ideas all the time. I walk around sort of with a book or a head full of titles, and I sort of keep those around a lot, and I wait for the moment to hit me. I don't know where it comes from. You know, I was cliche to say, well, it fell out of the ceiling. It sort of comes down and hits you and goes, wow, and you never know where it's going to be. You know, you might be in the middle of lunch, or you might be in a shower, or you might be 3 o'clock in the morning waking up from a dream or something like that. I think to get into it, to capture the moment is the best time. You know, when it hits you, go do it. And so there's really no ground rules. I've written songs in any period of a 24-hour day. It just depends on when it happens. There are times when things are more, I guess, custom-oriented, and so you write with somebody and you know you're going to write a certain song for a certain person, and you go in with that attitude, and you sort of compile all of your, you know, thoughts and actually hash something out, you know, which is also a fun way to write, especially if you're collaborating. But as a solo writer, you usually just sort of go with when it hits you.
Do you know immediately when it's finished if it's a hit? Do you
Yeah.
have an instinctive feeling?
Yeah. I mean, I've been wrong, but I'm still convinced sometimes. I don't mind being proven wrong either. I mean, if I'm wrong, then I'll say, whoa, boys, I messed up, you know. I'll try again. But no, there are times when you definitely get some sort of inside magic feeling. I mean, your hair stands up on your arm and you go, that's it, you know. I think that connection is, you're convinced that that's what's going to hit the masses. That's what's going to hit, you know, the person out there that actually listens to music and lives, you know, for the next kind of hit to inspire them and so forth. You kind of know that when you've been in the business a long time.
What song did that happen with you the most? Which can you
Oh,
remember?
it happens with a lot of them. I don't know. I think you said the most. That's a good word to play on, because I think the one song that I was so convinced, I said when we wrote it, I said this is a #1 record, and that was sitting on the dock of the bay, for sure. I remember that moment well. And the reason I do is because Otis was in a real precarious situation with his career in terms of crossing over and how far he could take his unique style of singing, you know. He was very, very big in Europe, but he hadn't really broken in the States, and we were setting on what we would look at as a record of, at that time, 16 straight hit singles in a row by recording, by our standards. In other words, what we looked for in a successful song in terms of, you know, how much it sold and the interest it, you know, stirred up and so forth. And there we were with 16 hit singles trying to get another one. And when we came up with Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, I just said immediately, this is it. This is the one that's going to do it. And unfortunately, he wasn't around to see that happen, you know, but I was right to some extent, I think.
You wrote it in San Francisco, did you not?
No, he started it in San Francisco. Otis was one of those type of people that really walked around with a guitar full or a handful or a suitcase full of songs. He always had 10, 12, whatever, how many ideas running around of unfinished things. And usually when he came to town, it was a very short stay. I mean, it was never longer than like a couple of weeks. So we really had to burn the midnight oil, so to speak, in the first 2 or 3 days he was here. And I just sort of, he'd throw this at me and I'd throw something at him that I'd been doing. And we just sort of together collaborated on certain ideas, and I just sort of picked the best of it. And I think, of course, I was very fortunate to be working with somebody like Otis Redding, who was so talented, but he really influenced me. And the funny thing that every time I look back on it, I used to write, if anybody ever listens to the songs themselves, a lot of those songs that we wrote together, I used to write about him, you know. Little things, like, you know, just like in Dock of the Bay, I left my home in Georgia. Well, he did. But when he sang those songs, like Mr. Pitiful and all that, I don't think he consciously was aware that he was singing about himself, because I never told him I was, you know, writing about him. He just sort of went through the motions, you know. He was just so full of music and everything. He put the same energy level in every song, whether it was a ballad or whether it was a fast up-tempo dance song. It was always the same Otis Redding, you know, which was really neat.
How did you first meet him? When did you first meet him?
Well, the way it came about, we were actually in the studio recording an artist named Johnny Jenkins, guitar player, left-handed guitar player. And I think at that time, Johnny had just come off of a hit record called Love Twist, the hit instrumental. And Joe Galkin from Atlanta had called and said, we want to bring Johnny into Stax and see if you guys can, you know, come up with another record for him. Well, it so happened that Otis, at the time, was sort of Johnny's driver and sort of set up the band, and then he would, you know, I guess on the gigs, I never got to see any of those gigs, but I heard stories about it. And he would naturally go up and sing some numbers, but he was sort of like the driver road guy. And so we were at the end of the date, and most of the guys, I think, had gone home. And so Al Jackson, drummer Al Jackson, came to me and he said, hey, he said, this guy out here's been bugging me all day long about, you know, he'd like for us to hear some of his songs or something. And he said, we ought to take a minute and listen to this guy. He sounds, you know, pretty honest. So we said, okay. So he comes down to the piano there and he starts singing These Arms of Mine, and we just went, immediately. We said, this is it. You know, this is what we've been looking for. So we grabbed Jim Stewart and said, hey, you got to hear this guy. Come on out. And he heard him, said the same thing. Jim said, boy, we got to record this. He said, well, get the guys back in here and let's put one of these things down. I said, well, half the guys have gone. So we just sort of piecemealed what band we had there. And I wound up playing triplets on the piano. And Johnny Jenkins played guitar, and Al Jackson, and I think Louis Steinberg at that time was playing bass. And there it was.
How long did you get to work with him? How long was it before
Otis?
that time until he died?
I don't remember. Otis died in '67. About 3 years, 4 years, something.
You were talking a little bit earlier, and you were talking about the different musical influences of the area, gospel and country, etc., etc. Where were these heard in Memphis? Was it a bar scene, or was it totally on the radio, or were there? What was the music scene like?
Well, in Memphis there was a lot of, I say a lot of, there wasn't that much, but there were several clubs, mainly black clubs, that you could go hear really good R&B bands. Club Tropicana was one, the Plantation Inn across the river. And as kids, I mean, underage, of course, you had, you know, we used to sneak in there and go listen to these groups, and that was a big influence to us. The group we started out of high school called the Marquis and all, we got into doing the front line thing with the horns and the steps and everybody doing the sort of choreography worked out stuff, and playing a lot of these funky kind of songs and so forth. We were influenced by people like Ray Charles and, like I said earlier, Hank Ballard and the Midnighters and that sort of stuff. That's what we liked the most, I think.
How did you cope with the racial barriers Was it something you ever took into consideration, being a musician? Did you have to?
No, no, there wasn't anything to cope with, because Duck Dunn and I talk about this every now and then. People outside of us were influenced by this whole thing, not us. I mean, it really didn't even get to us at all. In terms of the music, when you went in the studio, there was no color. I mean, you had likes and dislikes and loves for certain kind of music and not others. It was a great marriage of musicians in the studio, and it wasn't only at Stax. It was, you know, other studios around town. Some of them worked, you know, with a lot of mixed groups and so forth. When you came in to play, you came in to play. I mean, it was work, but it was also a good time. It was a fun thing to do. Later on the road, when all of the, you know, so-called racial things broke out, which was something we had no control over, there were times when on the road with Booker T and the MGs, because we were two white guys and two black guys, and here we were, and we were just out there to play music, you know. A lot of people that had booked us, listened to our records, whatever, didn't know that it was a mixed group. And so a few things, you know, went down that we just sort of walked around, you know. We would stay in hotels on the outskirts of town rather than plowing through and saying, hey, we're going to just brave this. We didn't look for trouble, and so we weren't bothered by it. So we were victims of something that we had nothing to do with, actually.
How did you first become associated with Stax?
Well, the funny little story, it actually started when we were in high school, and we had a pretty neat little band that was playing sock hops. We used to call them sock hops. And disc jockeys would have these dances on Friday night at the gymnasiums, and we would play those, and we would play proms and dances and all that. And one day, this guy that you know, we knew in school, we hadn't really associated with him that much. I mean, we used to run into him a lot. He said, "I want to be in your band," you know. And we said, "Well, we're not really looking for anybody, you know." And he said, "Well, you know, I play saxophone." And we go, "Oh, well, okay, you know, we don't have any horns." He said, "Yeah, I know that. I just, you know, thought I'd really like to be in your band." And I said, "Well, how long you been playing?" He said, "Oh, I've been working on it now, you know, about 3 or 4 weeks, you know." And I went, Jesus. I'm not too sure whether, you know, we're going to be interested in horns. And then somehow in the conversation, it came out that his mother owned a recording studio. And I said, "Gee, you know, we're going to be rehearsing this weekend. If you want to come by, and you know, we'll listen to you and check you out." And his name was Charles Axton, the son of Estelle Axton. And so that's sort of how it started. And of course, we called Charlie Axton Packy Axton. And he turned out to be a real good musician, and later a good writer, producer himself, and so forth. So that's sort of how I came to Stax in through the underground network in the family, I guess you'd say. And then later, I went to work for his mother, who ran a record shop. And we had been taking the band out. They had a little studio out in Brunswick, Tennessee, and she had a little record shop up front, and the studio in the back, and we'd go out there on weekends and kind of practice and put down tapes and so forth. And then later, they acquired the theater down on McLemore and decided to put in a studio. And of course, we helped put it in, pulled out the seats and put up curtains and all this sort of stuff, and sort of really helped build the studio. And Miss Axton put in a record shop there, and I worked in the record shop there for quite a while.
I can remember in the interview that you did when we did the other show, and listening to you talk about that whole period and the productivity, and how many songs came out of that. Could you talk about it a little bit more?
Well, I think the amount of songs came out of the demand for that kind of music. The more successful we were, the more people were brought in, the more artists that were signed to the label. I think we wound up at one time, we had a roster of about 17 artists. And when you take a little label that started with like 4 or 5 people, and all of a sudden one day here you are with 17 artists that you've got to keep records going on and albums and songs and all that. And of course, like any other business, the better you are, then the better of the cream of the crop of talent that comes to see you, you know. And so you really do get to kind of pick people, and that's sort of how Isaac Hayes came about, and David Porter and people like that, you know, they were right there. David, of course, had been around from the early days of the studio, you know, writing songs and so forth. And at the time we teamed him up with Isaac Hayes. It was just you know, a marriage from then on. So they were a pretty good writing team with things like Hold On, I'm Coming, and You Don't Know Like I Know, and Soul Man and so forth. So they had their success. But that's what I was saying. It's the better we got at our own you know, trade or whatever we were doing over there, making records, the more people that came to see us that wanted to get in on the action, so to speak. So it just sort of was a snowballing effect, I think.
What an incredible sense of family that must have been.
Oh, it was amazing. Groups that would go out with just a guitar player. It's sort of like it would be an a cappella group, and then there would be this guitar player playing this great stuff, you know. And I really enjoyed that. Later, I guess, you know, like any other kid of that time, guitar players, I guess from Dwayne Eddy to Chet Atkins to, you know, from Tal Farlow to, you know, all of the great guitar players. Chuck Berry, of course, with his rock and roll stuff and everything. I don't know if I was really as much intrigued by guitar as I was by groups and styles and, you know, Little Richard and the Platters and people like that. You know. Hank Ballard and the Midnighters, well.
What made you decide to become a guitar player? When did you pick up your first one?
My first one, I really didn't have a musical background in the family. My aunts and my father and all, they had a like for music. You know, they sang and stuff like that, and some of my aunts played a little piano. And my uncle played a little fiddle and a little guitar, and I'd, you know, come in from the fields every now and then. I'd go to the closet and sneak out his guitar and bang on it a little bit. And I think maybe that's what got me interested. I liked the sound of it. I liked the ring of the notes. It was always kind of intriguing.
Now, when we were in the car on the way over here, you talked a little bit about, I guess it was your first recording session, and that happened with Sam Phillips at Summer.
Well, it wasn't my first session. It was my first song.
Ah.
And a real funny story about that.
I have to stop and change tape in about 20 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, we ready to start?
But you don't want to back up and have to start over then, right?
I mean, if you,
Okay.
you know, uncomfortable with an answer or something. We can
That way I won't take any chances. I'll just...
Oh, we can make it as, you know. We like raunchy stories. We appreciate those.
Oh, I don't have any of those.
You don't?
No, not on camera. You want that, you got to go back in the car.
I see. Okay.
Right, Knox?
That's right. Clean.
Okay, tape is rolling.
Or Tour Graceland, maybe. That's a good place to tell some raunchy stories.
Yes, Steve.
Steve, who were some of your first musical influences?
Oh, I don't know. Let's see, how far do I need to go back for that one? First influences, I think, when I was a kid listening to the Grand Ole Opry. I got influenced by, I think, the upness of music and, you know, the happiness and all that sort of thing. In terms of where it led me later, I think when I first came to Memphis, I was just young, 9 years old. I had my first real chance of listening to black gospel on the radio, because there was a lot of that here, you know, on WDIA, and I really enjoyed that music. I don't know what it was at such a young age that impressed me, but the black spiritual music just, it gave me a whole different attitude, you know, about music. And when I got into it later, I really liked the way the guitar player sort of played. There was a lot of groups. I remember doing it. I don't really remember what year it was. I guess I was somewhere around 14 years old, and either from watching TV or just the like for it, I said, I want to play guitar. And believe it or not, I set bowling pins down here at Park Lane's bowling alley one summer. I think it was 10 cents a game or something like that, and saved up about $20, and I ordered my first guitar from Susan Roebuck Catalog. They brought it out on a truck. That was my first one. Didn't even know how to string it or anything. It just come out of the box and they said, here it is. And I went, wait a minute, isn't it supposed to be tuned and all that stuff? So that was my first experience with a guitar.
Did you have any formal lessons, or did you?
No,